go ahead and call the Sherwood Budget Committee to order for our orientation meeting. First thing I'd like to do is see this in order for us tonight. Go ahead and elect the chair of the budget committee. Usually needs to be somebody who's not a school board member. Jessica.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to nominate Nicole Brutowski to serve as Budget Committee Chair.
Aye. Vote. All right, I will pass the gavel down the table. And Madam Chair, I think all you need to do is hand it off to staff.
All right, then I will hand it off to Mr. Rose.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time this evening. Thank you, Chair Allen, members of the board, Chair Brutowski, members of the Budget Committee, Superintendent Corey. Tonight, we're going to do our annual Budget Committee orientation. Christine, I'm going to give Christine a moment to pull the slide deck up. We'll go ahead to the next slide. These are a few of the items we're going to cover this evening. The role of the Budget Committee, the State School Fund as it sits today, the federal response to coronavirus pandemic, and then our budget development process. Next slide, please. To meet the legal requirements to pass a budget for next year, this committee has some specific roles that I outline here. A budget committee is a group of school board members and an equal number of citizens that review the district's proposed budget. The role of the committee is to receive the budget message and the budget document from the superintendent, which you will actually do on June 2nd at our first full budget committee meeting. And then the budget committee is the means for the public to have their say within the budget process. And so that's a really key part of having our budget committee members, is to give the opportunity for the general public to speak to the needs of the district and the budget specifically through you. Next slide, please. The budget committee reviews the proposal to ensure that the dollars are being spent in accordance with kind of the goals of the district and furtherance of the district's stated goals. The committee approves the budget at a major fund and function level and then sets the tax rate. And once complete, the budget committee refers the budget to the school board, and the school board will then hold a public hearing and actually adopt the budget. The budget committee does not approve new personnel, does not set salaries, benefits, or contract terms for employees or administrators, and is also outside of the committee's scope of work to set staffing levels or decide whether or not a program is continued or cut. And then the budget committee's work is complete after it has approved a proposed budget. Next slide, please. So our state budgeting process has pretty set patterns in the past as it's developed. Typically, the state budget is started with the governor's recommended budget, which usually comes out before the legislative session, and then is followed by a slightly higher Ways and Means Committee co-chair's budget. And this year that did not happen. Both of those came in at $9.1 billion for a state school fund. While just a bit higher than last biennium, which is appreciated, we believe something closer to $9.6 billion is necessary statewide to maintain current service levels. And by current service levels, we mean the programs that exist in our schools now, what it would cost with roll-up cost, or what it would cost, including roll-up costs, to maintain those same things for the next year. Due to normal yearly roll-up costs, current service levels rise. And while the 9.1, well, with the state budget, it was at 9.1, we were actually developing a budget at 9.3 based on conversations with our peers across the state and with the recognition of what we believe we need to maintain our current service level. And we did that in part in hopes that the legislature would hear the needs and be able to respond. And in late breaking news, literally today, we found out that the Ways and Means Subcommittee has in fact approved 9.3 billion. It will go to the full Ways and Means Subcommittee, I believe, on Friday. And while it's not a done deal, it's certainly good news and certainly is pointing in the right direction. So. And I forgot to mention when I started, if you have any questions, by all means, please stop me at any point and ask those. We will also have time at the end for questions. So the state is also expecting additional revenues from the federal ESSER bill that will be sent to districts to help with shortfalls and costs related to COVID. Now, the co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee has said that this really needs to be utilized as much as possible to maintain current service levels. These monies are shared on a Title I allocation as opposed to our state school fund, which is divided up by average daily membership or number of students enrolled. And that really is, frankly, a little bit unfortunate for Sherwood because we get far fewer dollars in that way than we would typically. And it means we can respond to some of our needs differently than some of our neighboring districts. And for example, Newburgh, which is about 200 students smaller, received $5.3 million from these funds. Woodburn, which is 400 students larger, received about 19.4 million. And our district received 1.12 million. So that kind of gives you an idea of the range and how that different allocation definitely affects Sherwood School District. And the same allocation method was used for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. And this is frankly why we can't respond to some of our, to the employment marketplace in the same way that some of our peer districts have.
Jim, can I ask a quick question?
Please do.
So is that a done deal, or is there any potential that that formula could be adjusted or changed in any way?
It's, I think, driven by the federal allocation, and they've allotted it on a Title I basis, and that makes it, really, I don't know that there's anything we can do, any argument we can make that will change that. So.
Jim,
Yes,
could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by responding to the job market, please?
So we have certain roles that are hard to fill, and right now it seems like we have more than typically we do, including instructional aides, custodians, some bus drivers as well. And we're hearing from our peer districts that they have started to increase the wages in those specific roles, utilizing these ESSER dollars. Well, we're a little hesitant to do that anyways, because the ESSER dollars are finite and have to be spent by the end of 2023. But we also aren't in a position, because of the limited numbers we're getting, to be able to do that on a broad basis.
Are we going to be able to track what that looks like in other districts so that when we get around to bargaining, we're able to, when we look at comparables, we're able to figure out truly comparable from temporarily comparable, if that makes sense?
It makes absolute sense. And I'm sorry, I'm going to look to Steve a little bit to see if he has a better response than I might have.
Sorry about that. We do conduct wage analyses every year for various employee groups. And so one of the ways we'll be able to track that is to see what kinds of changes occur over time. I think the probably more timely way is just through conversations with people in other districts. And so we've already engaged in those. We have an HR director meeting coming up next week, and I'm going to be really curious to hear what district's long-term plan is, because people have not shared that at this point.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Christy. So as we've approached this budget, we've had some questions raised regarding the budget picture. And a couple of questions in particular are what happened with the work share savings, and don't we have savings from having our buildings closed for the majority of the last year? For your reference, the work share program was a federally funded program through the Oregon Employment Department that allowed us to furlough employees 1 day a week, and then the employee could apply for unemployment and get that plus the $600 federal, I forget what they called that, essentially the supplement. Nearly every employee in the district actually benefited from that program, and we made sure that any that didn't weren't harmed by it either. So we made sure everybody stayed whole. And we did that for approximately 10 weeks, and the point was to avoid layoffs, which is in fact exactly how we use those dollars, to make sure that we didn't have to lay off any employees. And it was part of the overall effort just to keep our employment last spring at full capacity and into the fall. As for savings from our buildings being closed, the reality is our buildings have been mostly open throughout the school year with some staff in and out of them. And that's caused some increased cost to cleaning and running the heating and cooling systems to kind of the specifications, or at least the recommendations from the CDC. And so it's actually increased our costs in some respects, and certainly it's a cost well worth spending, but it didn't mean that we ended up with additional rollover dollars for this year. Christine? We've also received some other funding and grant opportunities, which we are utilizing to provide additional services and opportunities for students. And these are meant to augment services to students, and we're trying to do as much as we can with these dollars, because we also recognize that our students have had a very different school year than they might have typically. One of those is the student investment account, and those are resources that are intended to support student health and safety, mental health, and then increase academic opportunities. And so that is something that we're continuing to use. Those are ongoing dollars, and so we have a process to identify where we're going to utilize those resources. And then in addition, the state recently announced a $250 million initiative to facilitate summer school programs. And again, this is to help students who over the last 12 months have had a different kind of educational experience than we'd expect and might need some additional help. We're developing a much more robust program for students than maybe we have in the past. This will start immediately after school and run for about 4 weeks. And then we're also looking for opportunities to provide enrichment classes and camps and programs for students. And that's, you may have seen some additional job description or employment opportunities across the district, and these are funded through that money from the state. So in years past, you've heard us talk about Davis Demographics. Davis Demographics is the company that helps us make projections for each year in terms of how many students we can plan on in the fall, and they give us a 10-year projection, and so we're looking at a 10-year swing. The document I handed out before the meeting is this year's report. We actually asked last fall for a very early report, and the numbers came back and they were very surprising. And part of it is that Davis Demographics, their whole process is driven by formulas based on the number of students we have this year, birth rates from 5 years ago that those kids become kindergartners, and then they look at a number of factors that have kids moving in and out of our district. And they found that because we had 400 students less this fall of 2021, compared to last year, that their projections ran through and show us losing students every year for the next 10 years, essentially. Now, the reality is, I don't think it's going to happen. And I also think we're going to have the opposite effect next fall when we open in kind of a normal capacity and we have students coming back. I think we'll have a lot of students that are currently utilizing other educational opportunities that will come back and be face-to-face in our buildings. And I think we'll have much higher numbers from Davis for the next 10 years. And so it's going to take maybe a year or two for those to kind of start balancing out, and that we'll get numbers from Davis that are more reflective of the reality on the ground. And it's just a fact that their formulas don't account for a global pandemic. And so it's really hard. I'll talk to them and see if they can adjust their formulas. As you can see, both on the screen and on that sheet, We dropped the last couple of years, but then dropped significantly from 2019-20 to 2020-21. And next year they project us dropping another 100 students. We've actually started the Synergy online registration system. So this is built into our student information system that some of you are probably familiar with. And it allows parents of students to go ahead and enter online all their information now for kids that are coming back into the district or kids coming into the district. And so we're able to watch those numbers on a much more kind of up to the minute process throughout the summer in particular. And we're already seeing quite a few kindergartners, as you would expect, but also students from every other grade that are joining us for next fall. And so their projection of 100 students less, I think, is inaccurate, and we'll get to it in a moment what the number we're using for the budget is. Chair Allen?
Yeah, Jim, isn't it also true that they take into consideration future growth in a fairly limited way? They counting things that are pretty certain and kind of not exactly in the pipeline, but close to the pipeline, but don't take into consideration predictable but longer term Sherwood West kinds of things and that sort of thing.
That's absolutely correct. So they do in their report reflect on the fact that we have Sherwood West and we have a few other kind of big projects that they expect to happen in the county or in the community. And they talk to all the cities that have students that come to Sherwood. So it's Sherwood, but Tualatin, Wilsonville, all of those. And then they only factor in basically projects that are really close to moving dirt, if not already moving dirt. And so some of those that are on Brookman Road, where they're starting to construction, they're starting to count those kids in future years. But some of the others, like Sherwood West, it's a concept, they reference it, but they're not counting on students from any of those areas.
Quick question. So for the 400 decrease in actuals, do we think that's from people moving out of the district or just going to a different, like private school? Do we know what the decrease was from?
It's kind of all of the above. We have some that we know have moved out of district, out of state. We have some that have gone to private schools and a number that have gone to homeschooling as well.
Okay.
So,
And then that 4620, that's everything like cloud and in-person instruction, right?
yes, it is.
Okay.
So the challenge for the district is that lost students equals lost funds. And we're experiencing that at a time when we are actually seeing some of our costs go up. And so for budgeting purposes, it's a balancing act of trying to make the most informed decisions we can related to funding and the expenditures. And typically a loss of 400 students would mean reducing staff. Now we're fortunate in that the way the state budgets and allows us to budget is we can pick the higher number of students we had from last year or this year to build our budget on. And so of course we're going to pick last year's because it was quite a bit higher, and that gives us a little bit of runway to make sure that we don't have a drastic cut. By not, but by being in a position where we're also going to grow this year, we can kind of look at and make sure that we build our budget on the right number. Typically, that loss of 400 students would mean that we would have to cut staffing. And we are, in fact, not filling 6 temporary positions that were for the cloud campus. And we're also not filling 5 permanent positions that are open through attrition, mostly retirements. And those are almost all, if not all, at the elementary level, which is, in fact, where all of our decrease, basically, of the 400 students came. So that's why we're not having to cut in the budget that you'll see here in a few weeks, large numbers of staff or any numbers of staff. We'll go to the next slide.
So that's a quick question.
Sure.
So when we track the students that are enrolling through Synergy, are we tracking the kids who are kind of traditionally counted in the migration path of people moving in to our district, different from somebody who may have chosen a different online or homeschooling route, so we can kind of judge how much of an impact that 400 and how much are coming back?
That's a great question. I'm gonna have to get back to you because I know the Synergy Online process is pretty extensive, but I'm not certain that we asked that question within that process.
I have a quick question. With the new guidelines as far as social distancing or whatever has been given, is the number of students per teacher that is allowed in the classroom changed?
Yes, so this year we've had to base our classroom capacities on the students that are allowed. It's 35 square feet per student and 6 feet between them wherever possible. And so that has definitely decreased the numbers that are allowed in a classroom. And so we are using more spaces for classes. We'll see, because we do that based on the Ready Schools Safe Learner guidance from the Department of Education. And so they've been pretty clear. We do expect on July 19th that they will come out with a new Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance that will guide us for the fall. And we don't know at this point what that's going to look like.
So does that mean a larger square footage area, or does that mean less? Because I assume the classrooms are defined by the walls. So you can only put a finite number of kids into that class, which equates to one teacher. So I would think you'd have to have more teachers for the same number of students that you would typically have had for last year.
Yes, with the caveat that we've also had the cloud campus. And so we've had
Correct, but
students
for
go to
next year.
that. So
Okay.
yeah, but you're correct. Our classrooms are kind of, walls are set. And so we've had to decrease the number of kids that are in those spaces.
Just to weigh in on that a little bit, when we built our classes last summer, thinking for this year, we built them small intentionally. And I don't say you get lucky by losing 400 students, because that's not really fortunate, but when you lose students at the elementary level and you're able to maintain basically your staffing, we were able to intentionally build small class sizes. We focused on K-3 first and then worked our way up, so that when we did come back in a hybrid model, we would be able to get as many kids in school. We were targeting getting kids in school every day a week, and we built them out. So we intentionally built them out as small. And that enrollment reduction, but stabilized revenues are really what helped us do that. And then the Ready School Safe Learners guidance did change from the 35 square feet per person to 3 feet of distance between kids. And so that gives us a little bit more flexibility, but it didn't change guidelines like at lunchtime and things like that, where you still need 6 feet. So just to give a little more detail to that question.
Thank you, Gary. So in summary, after the governor's budget came out and we received our draft from Davis Demographics, we worked through a number of scenarios for both enrollment and state school fund. And with input from the board, we landed on the 9.1 billion state school fund and an enrollment figure of 4859. And that 4859 is halfway between our enrollment for this fall and the original enrollment projection pre-pandemic for next fall. So this is before Davis Demographics responded to the pandemic decrease for next fall. So we kind of split that difference. And as you heard, we switched from the 9.1 to the 9.3, which proved probably to be the right move, assuming the Ways and Means Committee is able to complete that 9.3 number.
Question?
Yes.
So the $1 million in cuts to achieve 5% reserves is based on the 9.1 or the 9.3?
That is based on the 9.1.
Thank you.
Yeah. Even at the 9.3, we'll be utilizing ending fund balance to maintain our current service level. And we'll try to use the ESSER dollars as much as possible to kind of offset that and decrease what the ending fund balance that we're utilizing. So, and with that, I think our next slide is for questions.
So do we anticipate being able to fully utilize the ESSER dollars by the 2023 deadline?
Yes, I do think we will. The guidance on it is pretty, it gives us a lot of flexibility. And having that 3-year period to utilize those, I think we'll be able to utilize all of them and be able to plan a little bit for this year, next year, and the following year.
It'd be great to see kind of what the planned utilization looks like, if possible, over the next couple of months, and be able to track that in a real thoughtful way.
Yeah, we have, like with the summer school program, there's a matching grant, or excuse me, a matching component to it where we have to match 25% of the resources that were given from the state. And luckily, part of that is we can actually use ESSER dollars to do that. And so we'll try our best to make sure that we're maximizing the summer school dollars at the same time that we're utilizing the ESSER dollars to extend our general fund further.
How much are we expected to get for the summer school dollars?
I'm going to ask Phil because it's roughly 1.3 million, and then we have a matching grant of 25%. So, Gary, do you have a specific number?
Yeah, really specific. So there's multiple different grants. So there's the summer enrichment grant, which is for grades K-8. That's $722,000 from the state and $241,000 in matching dollars from the district. There's a credit recovery for grades 9 through 12. That's $872,000 total, $653 from the state and $218 from the district. And then there's also a child care grant of about $100,000 with no matching funds. So all that rolled together. Yeah. You'll get lots more about that at the next part of the meeting. No, it's all good. That's just why I have the number handy, because it's.
Thanks, Gary.
Hello, this is Mike. As far as the money from the student investment account, things geared for the health and those sorts of programs. How much are we anticipating of that still being able to use? I know when we talked about this originally a few years, last year, there was our initial thoughts, and then those had to be rolled back a little bit. And then are we rolling back even more from what we talked about last year?
So we won't be able to invest all that we'd hoped about a year ago pre-pandemic. In this current school year, we still got some money from the student investment account, but if you remember when we built our student investment account, some of it went to cover positions covered by that grant that we would have had to cut because of reduced spending. So we spent about $1.2 million or so covering positions that dealt with mental health and safety and all the things that aligned with that grant. And we really didn't have any additional money to invest. For this coming school year, we anticipate having, I don't have the number in front of me, but $1.2 million or something like that in new investments, which was less than what we'd had before. And I don't have those numbers in front of me, but those are in the neighborhood. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I just wanted a general idea of ballpark of, we're still able to use some of it for its intended purposes, and understanding that with COVID, it isn't as much as we were hoping.
But it's still a significant positive investment, which will really help out the district.
And I just want to clarify, we are using all of those dollars for their intended purposes. There's just a broader definition that some of them can be used for existing services and some of them are used for new services, existing services that would have otherwise potentially been cut because of budget needs. So all of it is within the scope of the law and appropriate use according to ODE.
100%, for sure.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit where we left off last year with regards to the budgets? Because I know we came together a year ago. There was some talk about shortages and potentially utilizing like the rainy day funds, or there's some other type of funds. And so I'm just more curious about last year and kind of where things landed and with regards to being able to utilize those rainy day funds.
The state did utilize the rainy day funds and the state school stability fund. And that's in fact, I think what they're trying to utilize again this year. That's getting us from the 9.1 to the 9.3.
Okay.
And those are kind of driven at the state level. And that's again, where we have that the challenge of deciding, are we budgeting at 9.1, 9.3, and then seeing where the legislature lands. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so no more questions? Oh,
Can I make one more comment? This is the comment I make every year at this time with the budget committee. This is really something that parents need to be involved in. I mean, we get most of our funding from the state, and it's the voices of parents that are either there or aren't there that have a big impact on what we're able to do in our schools. So please pay attention to this, write your representatives, and tell them we would love to have that 9.6.
For the 400 students that, I mean, I assume as students withdraw, we kind of know why they're withdrawing, whether or not they're moving, whether you're transferring a file someplace. Is that correct?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay. So for those that have chosen alternative, is there any outreach or follow-up to advise or to share the plans for the next year to bring them back or to encourage the back, or is that overstepping a bound?
That is a great question, and it is something that we're actually working on. And we're working on a couple different things. One is the cloud campus and looking at what is the ongoing interest in that by parents that have utilized that. We're also going to reach out to those families that have left, and at least the ones that don't appear to have moved out of state. We will email those parents with kind of an invite to, here's the Synergy online registration. If you're planning to come back in the fall, we'd love to have you go ahead and submit those at this time so we can do our planning.
What's been the interest on the cloud campus for next year?
You know what? I have an 8 o'clock meeting tomorrow morning to find out. So I apologize. I don't have an answer for you at the moment.
Just one other thing to note on the enrollment, sorry, Director Adamson, is that the biggest grade level of kids that we saw the drop in was actually kindergarten. That's where our numbers dropped the most by far, which isn't surprising for a couple reasons. One, there's no compulsory attendance for kindergarten. You don't have to enroll in kindergarten. You could just start in first grade, or you could just start in kindergarten with an older kid. And redshirting, for the term redshirting is kind of common anyway. So I think the state is sort of embracing for a bubble of kindergartners that's going to work through our system for the next several years. And we're already seeing kids at the other grade levels trickle back in who homeschooled or went to an online private school or something of that nature. So, and we are reaching out to those families we know and just not only to find out what their plans are and to welcome them back, but just so we know so we can plan.
Wasn't there a kindergarten night, was it last month?
Yes.
Did we see any swing the other way where supporting that children are starting at a later age into kindergarten, or they're just going to register as a first grade student?
We don't have much indication of that yet. And it was interesting. It was our first virtual open house. And so it's a change. It's hard to compare apples to apples. And we've also changed the way we register to online, which I think makes a lot of sense. But even that's a change, which makes it harder. We'd have data that we tracked, and if we had so many kindergartners enrolled by June 15th, we could project that we might have so many by the time school starts. But that was with one methodology, and now we have a different, and so it's a little bit harder to project. But the good news is we are seeing. For me, the good news is we're seeing kids in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 enrolling to come back who left for some other reason. Not in huge numbers, but in good numbers considering how far we are from the start of the school year. And the kindergartners are just kind of continuing to trickle in. And so, and we're hearing anecdotally from families that they want to come back, that they didn't want to leave the schools, but it didn't work for their family to stick to the timeline they couldn't be at home with their kids from 8 to noon to go through that schooling process. It just didn't work. And so they took another option, but a lot of them are telling us anecdotally they want to come back. I know that's not hard data, but I think there's some signs for optimism out there. When knock on wood, but I don't know if that's helpful or not.
I just have a question with regards to some of the neighboring districts. Did they also see this percentage of decrease?
Yes.
Roughly?
I don't know about the exact percentage we saw, but I think all districts in our area saw students leave for other options for sure.
And they saw kindergarten as the primary age too. That was just really common across the state.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that was exactly the question that I was going to ask as well, is that this is not unique to Sherwood. This is not unique to us. It's not something that's happening here that we aren't seeing elsewhere. This is pretty common across most metro area districts to see a decline in enrollment, which is why entities like Davis are having a hard time accounting for it, because this is a unique circumstance.
Certainly.
Well, and I think anecdotally, I've heard the same thing. Anybody that was on the bubble of should they enroll or not, just decided to wait a year. So, so if we can have Davis demographics start projecting for zombie attacks and alien apocalypses, that would be really helpful. Okay. Any other questions? All right, and because this is an orientation, there's no action items, so that concludes our business, and so meeting adjourned.